Japanese efficiency is not ancient wisdom encoded in the DNA, it is scar tissue. Scholars look at the just-in-time system and call it a masterpiece of engineering culture. They are wrong. It is a survival program, precision engineered during the volcanic winter of the 1780s, when an entire civilization learned that the only alternative to perfect efficiency was starvation. In the summer of 1783, two volcanoes ended the world as Japan knew it. Mount Asama erupted in July. Across the planet, Iceland's Laki volcano had already been bleeding sulfur dioxide into the stratosphere for weeks. Together, they formed a reflective haze that choked the sun over the entire northern hemisphere. In Japan's northeastern provinces, the rice bowl of the nation, the cold summers that followed were not merely bad harvests. They were biological collapse. The rice rotted in the paddies, grain prices quintupled. Records from Sendai and Morioka describe peasants grinding pine bark and dried grass into wooden pots. In the domain of Hachinohe, of 65,000 inhabitants, 30,000 died. Contemporary accounts record streets strewn with unburied skeletons and inscriptions at local temples, later deliberately defaced out of shame, that recorded outbreaks of cannibalism. This was the Tenmei famine, the deadliest in Japan's early modern history. And it did not arrive alone. It followed the Kyoho famine of 1732 and preceded the Tenpo famine of the 1830s. For 2 centuries, Japan was trapped in a cycle of starvation. In that world, waste was not inefficiency, it was a capital crime. But why couldn't Japan simply import food? Why couldn't it trade, colonize, or escape? Because in 1639, the Tokugawa shogunate had locked the door. The Sakoku edicts banned ocean-going vessels and severed almost all foreign trade. Where Britain used the sea to escape its island constraints, Japan used the sea to seal its cage. The cage itself was brutal. Japan is mountainous, volcanic, and small. Only 12% of its land is flat enough to sustain rice cultivation. By 1700, every viable field was already occupied, and the total population had hit a hard ceiling around 30 million. There was no room left, no ghost acreage from overseas colonies to absorb the pressure, no cheap imported grain to buffer a bad harvest. Japan was a sealed, closed-loop system being cooled from the outside. The survival equation had only one solution. You must generate more output from exactly the same land, with exactly the same people, without wasting a single variable. Not a grain of rice, not a drop of water, not a single nitrogen atom could be misplaced. This is where lean was actually born, not in Toyota's factories, in the sewers of Edo, because Japan had no coal to manufacture synthetic fertilizer and no colonies to import guano. It did something no other urban civilization had attempted at scale. It built a commercial market for human waste. Shimogo, the contents of Edo's latrines, was not a nuisance to be disposed of. It was a commodity to be bought, priced, and transported. The market had a precise logic. In rental tenements, landlords held legal ownership over the waste produced on their premises and could charge farmers accordingly. The price was not fixed, it fluctuated. A wealthy merchant's waste fetched a premium over a laborer's because a richer diet meant denser nutrients. Professional night soil collectors ran logistics networks of startling sophistication, moving this biocapital from city neighborhoods back to mountain farms in a continuous loop. In the early 18th century, Edo's 1 million residents were generating an estimated 500,000 metric tons of fertilizer a year. This is the true prehistory of Muda. Technology is a response to price signals. In 18th century Britain, labor was scarce and expensive. The market signal was unambiguous. Human time cost too much, build a machine to replace it. Result, the Industrial Revolution, capital-intensive, energy-hungry, world-conquering. Edo, Japan received the opposite signal. Land was the ultimate bottleneck. Labor was abundant and cheap. The market said, don't build machines, use more hands more carefully. Japan didn't build engines. It engineered human beings to function like engines. Since you couldn't expand the system outward, you compressed the individual inward. Every movement had to be precise. Every hour had to produce. Maximizing output per square inch of land was not a corporate KPI. It was the physics of staying alive. The economic historian Akira Hayami named this trajectory the Industrious Revolution, the path that pits maximum human exertion against land scarcity as a deliberate alternative to capital accumulation. Japan and Britain stood at the same crossroads in the 1700s and walked in opposite directions. Both paths worked for a while. Survival at this level of precision required total social synchronization. You couldn't have one family planting late and contaminating the water schedule for everyone downstream. The solution was Murahachibu, literally village 80%, formalized in the Edo period. In a community of 10 essential functions, firefighting, funerals, weddings, disaster relief, harvest coordination, an offending household would be cut off from 8 of them. Only 2 remained: help with fires to prevent the whole village from burning, and help with funerals to prevent corpses from rotting in the street. For everything else, the violator was deleted from the survival network. This was not social peer pressure, it was a death mechanism. In a famine winter, to be ostracized meant you would not be told when the communal granary opened, would not receive emergency water rights, would not have your crops harvested with the village's collective labor. You followed the schedule not from choice, but because exclusion equaled extinction. The Sankin Kotai system, formalized in 1635, compelled every domain lord to spend alternate years residing in Edo, maintaining a second mansion in the capital at enormous expense while simultaneously administering their home domain. The total cost of these processions and urban establishments consumed a staggering share of domain income, sometimes exceeding 70%. The economics of Sankin Kotai were deliberately ruinous. A daimyo's procession to Edo was not a modest diplomatic visit. It was a mobile court, sometimes numbering in the thousands. Porters, samurai, attendants, horses, palanquins, snaking across the Tokaido Road for weeks. The shogunate mandated the size of these entourages based on domain wealth. The richer the domain, the larger the required procession. The larger the procession, the greater the expense. It was a fiscal trap disguised as ceremony, and it worked. Domain after domain sank into debt to Osaka merchants, who lent at rates that ensured the debt would never be fully retired. By the early 19th century, some domains were spending over 80% of their annual revenue on Edo-related costs. The daimyo became, in effect, glorified debt managers. Their samurai retainers, paid in fixed rice stipends, saw their real incomes collapse as rice prices fluctuated and debts mounted. This pressure cascaded downward. To meet cash obligations, domains converted tax obligations from rice to coin. Peasants who had once paid a share of their harvest now had to sell that harvest, and more, to generate hard currency. They planted cash crops. They took on buy employments. They worked longer. The shogunate had built a machine for draining provincial power. A system this demanding cannot be sustained by fear alone. Fear burns out. You need something more powerful. You need people to want it. That was the work of 2 men, Ishida Baigen and Ninomiya Suntoku. Baigen, the 18th century merchant philosopher, taught that commercial diligence was not merely practical, it was sacred. To work honestly in one's role was to fulfill a cosmic duty. His Shingaku movement brought this gospel to townspeople and peasants alike, and as he rebuilt them, he taught Hotoku, repay your blessings through diligence. The grinding misery of cold summers and empty granaries was reframed as a holy calling. To work past exhaustion was not suffering, it was sincerity. To live on almost nothing was not poverty, it was virtue. He turned the scar into a badge of honor. When the Meiji Restoration opened the doors in 1868, Japan faced a world it had been sealed off from for over 2 centuries. The new Meiji government sent missions to the West. The Iwakura mission spent 2 years studying factories, parliaments, banks, and armies across America and Europe. They returned with a blueprint. The slogan was Fukoku Kyohei, enrich the country, strengthen the military. Japan built silk reeling factories in Tomioka, steel mills in Yawata, shipyards in Nagasaki, railroads stitching the islands together. a national education system that achieved near universal literacy within a generation. By the 1930s, Japan was a major industrial power. By the 1960s, it was an economic miracle. By the 1980s, its corporations were buying American landmarks, and its management techniques were being studied in every business school on Earth. Western observers called it miraculous. It wasn't a miracle. It was a 3-century head start meeting a 50-year sprint. The labor discipline, the process precision, the communal coordination, the zero-waste logic, all of it had already been forged in the frozen paddies of the 1780s and the debt-ridden villages of the Sankin-Kotai era. Japan's population had been industrialized by climate pressure long before a single factory was built. The Meiji state simply added capital, technology, and a national mission. Toyota didn't invent just in time. It gave a name to something that had been running since 1783. The Little Ice Age was a civilizational stress test. 3 episodes, 3 outcomes. The Ming Dynasty was rigid. It shattered under the cold. Britain was aggressive. It escaped through coal and colonies. Japan had neither option. It turned inward. It built a cage of extraordinary precision and discipline, and it survived the frost. Next episode, we go north, to Scandinavia. They chose to cooperate. Worldline, decoding the logic that shapes the world.